Good morning, good evening, everyone, wherever you might be around the world. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Megan, and I'm joined by Paul, who I work with on the Trans-Caucasian Trail, which many of you probably know, and if not, you'll hear a tiny bit about before we get to our main attraction. Our dear friend Richard, who is a absolute legend in the world of people who know and care about Georgia's mountains. For the amazing work he's done in Svaneti and the resources he's created to help the rest of us get out there. So yeah, welcome to our virtual campfire. This is something we started doing back in May when we were all little bums that we couldn't welcome people to the Caucasus in person and show off its beautiful mountains. And we realized that there's an amazing community of people around the world who are also really interested in this region. Some of whom live here, some of whom are very far flung. And it's been pretty fun to have people gathered around our screens and hang out and talk about this, these remarkable mountains that we all love. So thanks for spending some time of your Sunday with us, wherever you are. Quick logistics. As I mentioned before, if you can make sure to keep your video and sounds off for now, that would be great. We'll be taking questions in the chat box throughout the event. So feel free to type any questions in there as we, proceed forward, and we'll drop them into the conversation or add them in at the end, depending on how things flow. And yeah, we're looking forward to it. In the meantime, since I know people are here from all over, we'd love it if you could introduce yourself in the chat. Just briefly say, where are you joining from today? If you've been to the Caucasus before, if you're planning a trip, we'd love to know what people's level of familiarity with the region is. And we're excited to see where you're all coming from. So thanks again for being here. Paul, hand it over to you to give a little intro.
Thank you, Megan. So Megan and I are co-directors of the Trans-Caucasian Trail Association. For those of you who are less familiar with our activities, we are trying to build a long distance hiking trail, a la the Appalachian Trail or the Pacific Crest Trail or the Via Alpina across the Caucasus Mountains. And we have spent a lot of time in Svaneti, which is a region of northwestern Georgia. And Richard, who is our guest this evening, is one of the experts on hiking the trails in Svaneti. I met Richard about 10 years ago, I think, when he was starting a small hotel in Mazari, Becho Valley, really beautiful part of Svaneti. And he was just so enthusiastic about the region, about the language, the unique language they speak in Svaneti, and about the incredible mountains there. And a lot of that enthusiasm rubbed off on me, and now I've spent a good part of the last 10 years in Svaneti as well. So Richard is joining us tonight to talk about his book, which is Svaneti, the Essence of the Caucasus. I have my copy here, very proud owner of a copy. And this is basically just, it's the best resource in English, but probably in any language, about hiking, skiing, outdoor activities in the incredible region that is Svaneti. So we're going to talk to Richard about the book and about his other activities and how he ended up.
Gave me the option of changing my, well, maybe I'll just go to settings. Where do you see settings on this thing?
So we're very happy to have Richard here. And I said in my announcement about the event that Richard hiked over 3,000 kilometers in Svaneti, but he actually corrected me. It's 4,600 kilometers just in this book alone. So if there's any question about Richard's authority about the trails in Svaneti, it's really no argument there. So welcome, Richard, and maybe you could give us a quick introduction to the book, the types of hikes that it covers, and why you decided to write this kind of guide to Svaneti.
Thank you, Paul and Megan, for introducing me and letting me talk to you tonight.
I told it where to go.
I think the book started already the moment I entered Svaneti because I started to hike and ski from the very day one, and I always brought my camera. And very soon I started to take notes from my hikes, and this information I've compiled up. And then I guess it was in 2015 or something, I decided I will make it into a book. And then there came a moment, I think I had been collecting information for about 2 or 3 years. And then there was this nasty tourist that came across our hotel, and he commented, "Oh, of course you have collected the GPS, right?" And I was just mute, and I couldn't say anything because I had not. So then I had to do all those 60 hikes that I'd already done once more.
Just to get a GPS check.
And then I added up another 36. So it's 96 hikes that are described in this book that was published a couple of years ago.
So you can see the trails here in the slide, and there's a small key in the bottom there for hiking, riding, biking, and skiing. So really incredible network there.
Yeah.
Yes, all the hikes you can do by foot, and 76 of those hikes you can do by ski, and 74, if I'm not mistaken, by horse, and about only 20 by bike, because for those of you that have been to Svaneti, you know that it's pretty steep. So of course you can hike or you can bike all of them, but then you have to be an extreme biker. But for most bikers, mountain bikers, it would be possible to do about 20 of those hikes. And they're all marked with colors if you can do it by foot or by ski or by horse or by bike. Also, if we speak about the marking here, all the hikes are marked either as yellow, as very easy, red if they are medium difficulty, and blue if they are more difficult. At the same time, I'm not a mountain climber. I'm quite afraid of big heights. So there's no mountain climbing with rope in this book. So that's like my criteria. I wanted to include only hikes that you could do by foot, that you can do without being a mountain climber.
Yes, I would say though that you have a Norwegian standard when it comes to the difficulty of hiking trails. So when it says it's difficult, it means really, really difficult. I'll say that.
The book is built up in the way that it's the first little introduction to the book, and then there's an overview about Svaneti, like Svaneti in short. Then there's some words about the language, because it's quite important for understanding the region and also the alphabet. Then you have the maps, and then the main part of the book is the description of all the hikes with the GPS, with the maps, with the pictures and the textual description, as well as some stories that I've added to make the reading more comfortable, more interesting. But those 5 things are like essential or included in all descriptions of all the 96 hikes. So
great.
Yeah, you can see some things that are in these brackets or the squares. These are like the short stories that are not actually linked to the description of the hike, but it says something about the religion, the culture, or the history of the area where you are moving, and hopefully that will make it a little bit more interesting. At least it was more interesting for me, instead of writing how to get from point A to B. And I could also write about what you see, more than actually only the nature, but also dig back into history, find more about what people believe in, and those types of information.
Great. Well, I know people are going to have a lot of questions, but I'm curious. You know, when you were thinking about how broad you wanted to make the book, you know, what were some of your criteria for the types of hikes that you wanted to go out and find and include in the guide?
All hikes, actually, from one point of view, they start where I live. So they start in the so-called Betri or Betro Valley, which you can see here. It's considered to be one of the most beautiful valleys in Svaneti, and that makes it one of the most beautiful valleys in the world, I would say.
True.
But actually, you can, if you have done like the Danish play Lego, like been building, then these trails are numbered, marked, so you can put them together. So, for instance, you can go 10 kilometers from my living place, then maybe that's one hike, and then you can get another hike that starts from there and continue for another 10 or 20 kilometers. And this means that you can go all the way down to Lower Svaneti. I am located in Upper Svaneti. So it passes across a lot of different mountain passes to Lower Svaneti, different routes. It also passes into the northern part of north of Svaneti, that means into Russia, which was very popular for hiking until 1995, some years after the Soviet Union broke down. Now the border is closed, so you cannot cross the border, but you can move up to the border. And if you're interested, you can also move from the Russian villages up to the mountain pass, more or less. So to get this historical dimension into it, I've included also those types of hikes across the mountain passes going northwards. Also, there are mountain hikes going westwards into Abkhazia, which is not longer controlled by Georgia. So there again, you can only go to the border. But I've been traveling to Abkhazia and then hiked up to, well, as long as I could, not all the way up to the mountain pass, but to try to get a glimpse of these historical hiking routes. And also eastwards to the region of Racha, and southwards to the region of Mingarelia. So it actually goes out all through Svaneti in all the direction into the neighboring regions and countries.
Great, yeah. So I think it's one of the coolest things about the book is that there are well, some folks were asking if there's day hikes or multi-day hikes. So as Richard was saying, there's day hikes and then there's extensions that go beyond that. So you can hike for multiple days using the trails in this book. And then I think it's so cool that some of these trails are historical trails that have basically now been documented that went across these various passes, which hopefully one day we'll be able to walk again. But in the past were really important historical routes as well. So it's very cool. And we have a question about the borders, actually. And maybe you could just describe for some people, since a lot of this region actually is in the border zone with Russia, how easy it is to hike in the border zone and what people need to do.
Coming from the Georgian side, when you are in Svaneti, if you move into the border zone, you have to get a permit from the border authorities, which is a simple matter. You just have to visit the border station and wait for some 5 minutes. And then they will give you a piece of paper. And with this, you can hike almost up to all the actual borders. Sometimes you have to show this piece of paper to the border guards, but sometimes you don't meet any border guards on your way. This goes also for if you are going in the direction of Abkhazia. No, actually there you don't need to have a border pass, but you might consult with the border guards just to be on the safe side. If you want to go to Russia or to Abkhazia and do the hikes from there up to the border, then you have to get the visa to Abkhazia, you have to get the visa to Russia, and then you have to apply about a month in advance in Russia to get a border permit. And you might not get it, but you might get it. And then you're allowed usually to get up to some 2-3 kilometers away from the border. But you cannot, as in Georgia, you cannot go up to the actual border. That's a crucial difference between the policy of hiking in Georgia and Russia. In Abkhazia, it is unpredictable. Sometimes you might get a permission from the Abkhazian authorities to walk up towards the border, but you will never be I think, to walk up to the very essential border. But on Georgian side, the Georgian border police is very hiking friendly. That's my experience. So
Yeah,
it's just to find out where you can get the permission, and you will get the permission.
Yeah,
More or
in
less
general,
right away.
yeah, in general, I find them very, very helpful. They want to record, that you're entering the border zone, and then record that you left the border zone is their main concern. So in general, they're really helpful. So this is a great resource for the, for how to find those trails. Speaking of finding trails, I was wondering, what kind of, how did you find these trails? Because, as someone who's been, doing a lot of research about trails in Georgia, it's often very difficult to find resources. And so what kind of resources did you turn to find these trails?
I think I had at least 3 resources. One was like the local people, what they told me, where are hiking paths, where are old sledge roads, and so on. So I tried to find out from them where it would be possible to go. Then I used my GeoLand maps and looked at all maps where maybe earlier there was a hiking trail or a trail, but not anymore. But then maybe it was possible to find where it was and maybe to renew it. And then the third resource was probably my own curiosity to try to find out from the relief of the terrain if it would be possible to hike there where there was not maybe a mapped hiking trail. And very often then I came across logical paths, trails in the terrain that was not on the map or being described by the locals that I found out. And some of these trails are probably such trails in this book too that has been a result of this curiosity.
Awesome. I think one of the coolest things about this book is that all of the place names are in Svan, which is the language spoken in Svaneti. It's quite different. It's in the Georgian language family, but it's quite different. It separated from Georgian, I think, 2,000 years ago. So the place names are all in Svan, which makes this book, in English, really the only resource and definitely the best resource for Svan place names. But I feel like it also might be the best resource in any language of Svan place names, because I don't really know that they're recorded anywhere else. Did you feel like that was an important part of what you were doing, was recording these place names in the Svan language?
Yes, I think that's natural out of respect for the local language and the local culture, and knowing the situation of the threatened Svan language, it was very natural to try to include at least the local names. But sometimes in brackets, I also have the Georgian names, if that could make hiking easier. But usually there's not that big difference between the local names and the Georgian names. You take away the last vowel I in Georgian names, and then very often you have the Svan name. There are some letters that you don't have in Georgian that you have in Svan, like A, and then you would usually have a Georgian A. So you can actually guess sometimes what could be the Georgian name or the Svan name, one knowing the other. Then also there's a policy of the local hiking trekking association, the Svaneti trekking organization, that was founded, I think, about 20 years ago. And they have done an immense work in labeling, marking trails in Upper Svaneti, some also in Lower Svaneti, but mostly in Upper Svaneti. And in the beginning, they made the signs that they put up in the mountains in English and Georgian. But then some 10 years later, they started to gradually switch them from having them only in Georgian and English to having them in English and the local name, meaning in Svan. So I was trying to follow that tradition, that they also started to try to have the local name on the hiking signs, and then also in the book, because if you speak to locals, they usually know the Georgian name too, but at least they will know the local name. So, and if you can show them and you can talk to them about which destination you are heading for, and you can use the local name that is in the book, it will make communication easier with the local people.
Great, great. So, you know, we're generating some interest in the book, obviously, and we keep referencing the book. You know, I was thinking we could tell everyone at the end how to get the book, but maybe you could just mention for people, you know, who are tuned in now, where the book is available now and what the plans are for, you know, getting it in the future, how they can get it in Georgia or online, and then we'll go into some more questions people have asked about traveling in Svaneti. So how do people get this book?
If you're in Georgia, you might get it at Prosperous Bookshop in Tbilisi. You can get it in several stores in Mestia, in Svaneti, in our little hotel in Tbilisi, Mazer, in the Betri Valley, or you can get it online, or you can contact me and I will arrange it for you, either by Instagram or Facebook or whatever social media, or email.
Okay, great. So we'll put Richard's you know, contact info in the chat here, and also Richard can add a link at the end for how to order it online. But for those of you who are here in Georgia, you can find it at Prospero's or in Mestia or Tbilisi. So some folks were asking about what is accommodation like in Svaneti, and also about, you know, food and so maybe if you could introduce people a little bit to you know, the Svan culture and how tourism has developed recently. You were there starting in 2009, but how has it changed since 2009 to now, and what kind of travel experience can people have in Svaneti now?
When I came to this valley where I'm living, there were 2 or 3 guest houses. Now there are about 50 guest houses in this little valley. And there are more guest houses in Mestia and in Urskul and other places in Svaneti. So it illustrates the quite quick change over the course of 10 years in Upper Svaneti in terms of tourism. So even before there were hotels or official guest houses, you could actually knock on people's door and you could be quite sure that they would let you in and they would give you a bed for the night. For instance, me and my friend, we hiked and we skied across or around Upper and Lower Svaneti in 2013 and 14. And this was 5 weeks by ski and 3.5 weeks by foot. And during those weeks, sometimes we stayed in tents and sometimes we stayed in mountain huts up in the mountains. But mostly we knocked on people's doors in villages. And it was only one time during these more than 8 weeks that we got an answer at like 10 o'clock at night that there's a hotel over there. Mm-hmm. In all the other cases, that means like some 50 cases, strangers, people that we didn't know and that they didn't know us, they saw that we were hikers and we were skiers, and they invited us inside and gave us food and a place to stay. So for those of you that have been to Svaneti and to Georgia, they know that the hospitality level is extremely high and very positive, and it's not a problem if you come to a village usually to find a place to stay for the night. And this is also a great thing about Svaneti when you're hiking. So you can usually, within the course of one day, you can cover a mountain pass and go down to the next valley where there's a village. So you can stay there for the night. You don't, it's not a 5-star hotel, but you get a clean room. Usually you can get excellent food and you have nice people around. So about the accommodation part, I would recommend not to stay like in the big towns, but go out to the small villages, maybe the highest villages, the most far away villages, and try to stay there for the night. So, and about food, I think that more and more people are comparing Georgian food with French and Italian food when they compare the best kitchens of the world. So up in Svaneti, you also add the Svan spices, which makes the food even better than in lowland Georgia sometimes. So if you like food, you will find your paradise in Svaneti.
I think that's very true. A friend of ours actually guided Rene Redzepi, who's the chef at Noma, a very famous restaurant in Copenhagen, across Svaneti, and he, was raving about food in Georgia in general, and also about hiking in Svaneti. So even world famous chefs love to hike across Svaneti. We have a question about how crowded trails are. Someone who was skiing in Svaneti, and also about dogs. So I would just say, just from my opinion, the dog situation is much better in Svaneti because there's not as many sheep in Svaneti. So the dogs are not as problematic because they're not protecting like a herd of sheep. But certainly in Eastern Georgia, I'm always kind of, warning people about the dogs, because you have to be prepared for the dogs, and prepared to stand up to the dogs. But in Svaneti, not so much. I don't know if you agree, Richard, but as to the question about crowded trails as well. So, the Mestia to Ushkuli hike has become very popular over the years. If you had a recommendation for a less crowded trail that's in your book, Richard, what would that be? I know there's many uncrowded trails that you found, but what would your recommendation be?
Yes, I think actually all the other trails would be the answer.
Yeah,
you are right that the most crowded, the only hiking highway is the one from Mestia to Ushkul, because it's the one that has been most known, the most written about, and people tend to be like flock people, and they go to where other people go. One of the motivations for me writing this book was to try to distribute the hikers all over Upper Svaneti and Lower Svaneti, because I found it quite unjust that these villages on the way from Mestia to Ushkul, they got all the income from the hikers, and they are beautiful villages, but there are other villages in Svaneti and other hikes in Svaneti that I think are just as beautiful, or sometimes even more beautiful. So one of the intentions then for the book was to try to get people out to see all the other beautiful places and villages and hiking trails in the region. And in that sense, if you could try to distribute the money that you leave behind when you stay overnight, maybe in a guest house, would make it better for not a few people in Svaneti, but a much larger number of people in Svaneti. And I think that when you get away from the highway, you will get more sincere attention, and you'll be more heartily welcome than maybe in the villages where they are getting really used to having all these tourists coming. So that could be a plus. And actually, I don't think there are other hikes in Svaneti that you will, except for a few, maybe from Mestia going up to the area about northern area about and southern area about Mestia, where you will meet a lot of people, and maybe also from our hotel going to the waterfalls, because that is like one of the most known hiking trails. But on the other hikes, you will probably in average meet either 0 people, 2 people, or 1 person per day. So this is, of course, compared to other places in the world where people are hiking in beautiful landscape like the Alps, Himalaya, it's an enormous advantage that you have the whole world for yourself when you're hiking in these beautiful mountains. So this might not last forever, but at least for now, you have an enormous privilege of hiking in Svaneti if you try to get a bit off the main highway.
Yeah, it's true. If you want to be by yourself, and you are willing to make the effort and do the research and are self-sufficient, then you can certainly find an empty trail. I would say, when it comes to hiking, for anyone considering, coming to Georgia for trekking, Mestia to Ushkuli hike is very, very spectacular hike. It's a world-class hike. And I don't think anybody's going to be disappointed. It has become very crowded in like August, especially. So if you're going from, especially because most people hike from village to village, it kind of, people are moving at the same time, but you can easily not go with the crowd from those villages to villages, or you could go in the opposite direction or anything like that. But there's a lot of variation, so it's about also doing a little more in-depth research. We at the TCT are also trying to expand the network of well-constructed, well-marked, well-signed trails, because that's another reason why the Mestia Ushkuli hike is so popular, is that it is a clear trail that is well-marked, and so some of these other trails, and including some of these trails in Richard's book, are not very well hiked and require like a certain level of know-how in the mountains. So definitely good to pay attention to the level of difficulty. Some of these hikes have no blazes. River crossings are not bridged. You have to rely on your own ability to cross very strong mountain rivers. So this is the very beginning of this kind of infrastructure, where now there's some information in English for some of these hikes, and hopefully over time more of the other infrastructure will also be established in Svaneti to make some of these hikes more accessible. And I also want to give Richard credit because he's not just an author, he's also been out there hiking and painting blazes for the past decade. So he's actually contributed enormous amount to the hiking infrastructure in Svaneti. And I was wondering, Richard, if you can, we'll keep taking questions from people, but just one question. Maybe you could just mention some of the other community activities that you've taken part in Svaneti, and kind of your what drives you to be involved in tourism there, and how and what your role is.
Well, maybe I briefly tell you how I happened to come to Svaneti, and then make it easier to understand. I was on my way to Svaneti 30 years ago when I was on a language course in Georgia and in Tbilisi. And all those foreigners, we went to the airport in Tbilisi together with a bunch of Georgians. And we were waiting for a helicopter flight to take us to Svaneti. But since there was fog in Svaneti that day, we were sitting in the airport for 10 hours. We never got on the helicopter, and we never made it to Svaneti. But while we were sitting there, all these Georgians were telling us these fabulous stories about Svaneti. So they made us very curious. But I went home, and I didn't come back to Georgia for many years. But in 2009, I decided I want to see this part of Georgia that the Georgians boast so much about and they speaking so highly about. So I went there for 3 days. I went to Mestia, as most people do, tried to find a hiking guide through the local trekking organization, but none of the hiking guides in Mestia picked up their phone when the lady from the trekking organization was calling. And there was only one picking up the phone, and that was in the Betri Valley. So I didn't have any idea where the Betri Valley was, but the next day, me and one more person, we went there, and we went hiking to the highest waterfall in Georgia, the Shtugra waterfall. And it was very bad weather. And the mountain guide, he didn't allow us to go close to the waterfall, and not to go high up, because he said because of security reasons, it could be stones coming down and so on. And that was the first time in my life in Georgia that I met the person. I was so so concerned about security issues and like what you cannot do. So on the way back from these waterfalls that we really never made it to completely, I asked him about his life and his family, and it turned out that he had 3 brothers and 1 sister and 1 very active mother, and they owned a house that they had plans to make into an hotel. And through the conversation, it turned out that they hadn't done it because they actually said that they lacked the money to start doing it. We went into a little building that was actually a church that was being renovated. It didn't have a roof yet. It was a 1,000-year-old church. And I sort of looked up into the sky and got an answer from the god above saying that maybe you should get involved. So to make a long story short, at the end of the day, we had agreed with the family that I would find that little money that was needed for getting this project going. And here you can see on the screen the house that the family used to live in that was now standing empty, and they wanted this house to be a little hotel. So at that time, there was no cash machines in Svaneti, so we went down to Zugdidi, which is down by the Black Sea. That was at that time like a 4-hour drive, and took out the money and gave it to them and wished them good luck. And then my curiosity grew, and I came back after 3 months to see how they were doing. And they had very neatly made an overview of all the money how they had spent the money. But there were 2 things that actually I didn't like that much. They had in this building, when I was there in June, all the walls were nice and white, but I thought that the foreigners wouldn't be satisfied with plain white walls. So they bought wallpapers, and they tried for the first time to put up these wallpapers. So of course there was a lot of bubbles in the wallpapers, and I told them diplomatically that maybe it's better to keep the white walls. You can imagine the reaction. It was not very friendly. But we agreed that, yes, maybe that's a better idea. And the second thing was that when I was there in June, the wooden floors were so beautiful. They were these white boards, and there was no painting or anything on them. They were just the natural colors. And when I came back, they had bought the only color that was available in Soviet shops. It was like a brownish reddish color, and tried to paint all the floors with this paint. And I told them again, maybe it's better just to keep the natural color. And again, I got this ugly look. But in the very end, they said that they will try to find a machine that could take off the painting. And even though they didn't believe that would be possible, they found such a machine the next day. But those 2 things actually made me involved in the area and made me come back more and more. And about community activities, it's such a beautiful area, and it's like ideal for a cross-country skiing. Me being a Norwegian by nationality, saw all these possibilities. So one of the things we started to do was to make tracks, cross-country skiing tracks and competitions for the children and adults in the valley. And then in the summertime, we made cross-country running competitions as well. Also, I saw that the language that people spoke was not used in writing very much, very little. There was only about some 20 books that had been published in the Swan language. And as Paul said, and this language departed from the other Kartvelian languages. It was 4,000 years ago, actually.
4,000 years ago.
So now
2000 BC.
it's very difficult for Georgians to understand Swan language without studying it.
Yeah.
And since the language was about to die out, and it was not taught at school, then we decided with other enthusiasts that we would make some competitions where young people, school children from 12 to 18 could write short stories. and they could get these published. And we made like these 2 books in 2000, yeah, some 5 years ago and 7 years ago. And that was, yeah, maybe the most exciting local initiatives or community activities. So now you have to talk a bit because I have to drink because my voice is there.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, well, while you're speaking, while you're taking a drink of water there, I just wanted to let people know too that you know, the TCT, we've been working in Svaneti over the years, and so we actually have a trail resource on our website. So if anybody wants to check that out as well, I'll include the link here. We extended the trail to the west that to include more of the villages in Western Svaneti. So a question here, does Richard speak Svan? Richard does speak Svan.
Hold on, drag the illusion. I don't speak well, but I speak some, yes.
Well, when I was in Svaneti a few years ago and I was hanging out with some of the border guards, I was told then about this legendary Norwegian who spoke fluent Svan. Is anyway the word on the street. So I suspect there's some modesty here, but what was the process like of learning the language?
Since there are no teaching material in English or any Western language, you just have to talk to the locals and write down the words they say and get the translation and try to make your own teaching material and your own vocabulary, your own dictionary. No, actually, I talked last summer to the Minister of Education of Georgia, and he said that this policy that has been the official one for many years, that all the children, the Svan children from day 1 in school learn only Georgian, will change. That they will introduce a couple of hours of Svan language in the school system, the Georgian school system. He told me that it would happen already this school year. Now this school year is quite special, so I don't think it has happened, but I hope that it will happen next year.
Yeah. One of the cool things about the book is that it's not just a hiking guide. It has a lot of pieces of information about the language and little cultural anecdotes and things about Svan culture. What was something surprising that you learned while you were putting together this guide that you felt like you needed to include for someone visiting Svaneti?
Well, I think one of the main surprises that I got when I came to Svaneti was that the attitude towards the language. Georgian language is one of the oldest languages in the world in terms of speaking in a language that has not changed much over the centuries. But Svan language is even older, so it can be compared like with Sanskrit, maybe as an example. One of the world's oldest languages, or if you think in European terms, maybe compare it to the situation with Italian and Latin. And Latin maybe being the Svan language, which still exists, but is on the verge of disappearing. So I think from a cultural heritage perspective, it's very important to keep the language, to try to preserve it and develop it. And I think that now also gradually the Georgian government is starting to realize that they possess an enormous treasure of this language up in the mountains, that it's not a threat to the Georgian language or state, but it should be treated as something very valuable. So I hope that will continue. I think that was the main surprise, that people were afraid of using their language, that they had gotten so used to being having this attitude that the Svan language is not a language, it's only a dialect, and it is more used for like talking to the cows. that it's not a rich language. You cannot use the language to express the things you want, which is actually not true. It's a very rich language with a lot of words that you cannot find in other languages to express a lot of nuances. So I think that was the biggest surprise. And the most serious thing is that I think that me as a person who don't risk anything by trying to support it, different from sometimes the locals could do, and speak up for the language. So whenever, over the past years, when I've been meeting with Georgian ministers, the first issue on my agenda is to speak about the Swan language and try to raise some support and understanding for the Georgian government trying to keep this language as a resource.
Wonderful.
Great. One really special thing about hiking in Svaneti is, you know, the mountains are incredible, but you come across these incredible ancient churches every day that you're hiking. We just had a picture of a church there. Yeah. I was wondering, this picture of the church here, can you tell us which one it is? And, you know, can you tell us a little bit about what's so special about the Swan churches and the, you know, historic heritage that is preserved there?
Yes, this church is one of the many village churches in the village of Yel, which is one of the most beautiful villages in Svaneti, and a village which is not very often visited by hikers. Actually, you can hike from my place to Uskuli, not on the highway, but through Yel and to Tsvirmi, and then join it for the last part again. Yel was also the epicenter of gold mining in Svaneti. This is where most of the gold is actually found. And also today you can look for gold in the river and areas around. Actually, under the landscape, there are ores or like rivers of gold in Svaneti, which is very little exploited or used. And there were huge demonstrations in Yale. So 4 or 5 years ago, when a Tbilisi company had given the permission to the Chinese company to start with excavators and huge machinery to start to gold mining. And the locals didn't like it, so they blocked it. And they, through their protest, actually, they showed that it's possible that the locals can have a say, and there's been no more Chinese activities in this village. So, the churches, most of the churches from the Georgian Golden Age, if you can say so, goes back to the 10th, 11th century. Some are even older in Svaneti. Most of the churches are built in the Byzantine style. Means that they are basilicas, they are rectangular, not the round ones as you find mostly in other parts of Georgia. But you have the more older style, which is the rectangular, as you can see here. But usually then, in the altar part, the back part of the church, you have this round semicircle. You can also see on this picture. Churches in Svaneti are sometimes not understood as churches by foreigners the first time you come, because they are small usually, and you can find them anywhere in the terrain, up on the highest mountain closer to God, and very often where in the pre-Christian time you had pagan temples. They are extremely beautiful, and they often can include icons that are of huge value. And even though some of the most beautiful and most valuable ones have been taken to the Svaneti Museum of History and Ethnography in Mestia, actually most of the resources, most of the icons are still in the small village churches. They are usually closed, but you can always ask the local to get the key or ask them to open the church for you. And some of them are like wonderful masterpieces going back 900, 1,000 years. there was one artist who made 3 or possibly 4 churches in the vicinity of this on the hiking trail from Yale to Årskog. And you can see these churches today, and you will be amazed by the beauty that opens up inside this rather simple or not so sophisticated exterior. It also means that even though there were frescoes also outside in the older days, they have been vanished or they have disappeared. But inside you can still see the 800 years old frescoes.
Yeah. There are a couple of outdoor frescoes for anyone searching for them. I know of a few one in Pari, one in Adishi, one in Mestia actually, and I'm sure there are a few more. But it's unusual for Georgian churches, but there are a few medieval outdoor frescoes that you can spot when you're hiking by. So.
And also maybe just add the multitude or the amount of churches. Like in the village of Latli, which has about 750 inhabitants, you have 68 churches. So it means that for every 12 or 13 person, there's a church. So you can, for instance, compare how many churches you should have in Tbilisi or New York if you should have the same ratio.
Yeah.
We just got a few more questions, I think, which might be a good bit to wrap up on since we're getting close to the end of our hour, about kind of the agricultural situation in Svaneti. Obviously, this is, there's a lot of farms around. So one person's asking, why are there no goats? Which is interesting, as well as someone's wondering about foraging. What do people typically forage there? And are there any, traditional or reliable or organized tracks that people use to forage?
The food that you get in Svaneti is, if it would have been marketed in other countries, it would have been big advertising campaigns saying that you will get ecological food, the cleanest food, because there's no pesticides used in agriculture in Svaneti, as far as I know. It's only the thing you got from the cows that are used as fertilizers. And it's done according to the old ways of cooking and harvesting. So you get ecological, clean food. And most people are self-sufficient. During the COVID times, when the tourists didn't come, then most people returned to agriculture. And they all have their own farms, and they can all survive on their own, actually, without buying anything but salt and sugar from the store. People usually have small plots. No people have usually any big plots of agricultural land. And the forests are usually owned, well, officially by the state, but unofficially and according to local understanding, by sometimes the village together or by families or individuals. And you are allowed, according to Georgian legislation, to take out the forest you need for your own heating. But otherwise, you have to pay a fee for each tree if you want to use it for commercial reasons. And even though there are some worries that in the 2 westernmost valleys, the Nakra and the Truber Valley, it's quite a lot of timbers being exported. This, according to my mind, is, at least in Upper Svaneti, not a problem in the other valleys. The forests are so immense, there's so much to take from that even though if you take some trees out per year, there will be more growing up.
Yeah, and speaking of the forest and foraging in the forest, I remember I was hiking down through the forest above Becho Valley, which is where Richard's hotel is, with someone who knew what they were doing as far as collecting mushrooms. And she collected 6 or 7 different types of mushrooms, and we fried them up for dinner at the guest house that evening. So those forests in that part of Svaneti are really great for foraging mushrooms, and the berries also are incredible starting in August in that part of Svaneti. So
also the forest, when you look at, for instance, the pictures in the book from autumn, from the fall, you will see the multitude of different trees that grow in Svaneti. And the forest around our valley are, I don't know the right term in English, like ancient forest. What you have in like the Amazonas as well, like they're completely
like old growth, yeah.
Old growth forest, right? So that is an Eldorado for forest people, like working in the forest industry go crazy when they see what forest we have.
Yeah, yeah. Great. So, well, we're at an hour here, and we don't want to go too much beyond an hour because you know, that's been established as Zoom etiquette these days. But we definitely, before we start winding down, I want to make sure that, Richard, is there a good link for people for finding the book online that you want to type into the chat, or that we can tell people about?
You can give the address to Grand Hotel Ushpa. They can write at info@grandhotelushpa.com or visit the website or the Facebook site. Okay. Or as you got a link to, I think, to my Instagram account, you can.
Yeah. So we've been posting your email and Instagram, and I'll post the website as well for the Grand Hotel Ushpa, and people can get in touch with you there. If you come to Georgia, the book is obviously available. We have been recording this session, so we'll try to post that in the next couple of days if anybody missed the session, and send that out to the folks who registered for the session. So definitely, if you have any questions, feel free to write Richard. I'll post his email again, or to find him elsewhere online. Yeah, thank you so much for being here, Richard. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Thank you very much for letting me be here, and let's hope that we can still meet again.
Great. Yeah, we will be sending out a few emails about TCT tours this summer. So we're really hopeful that the borders are going to be open this summer, and we can welcome people, our supporters who want to hike with us for our hikes across Svaneti. And it's such an incredible place for anybody who hasn't been here. Hope you can all make it soon. And thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Richard, and thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you.